expansion in the waters of Bobcat Creek, which is one of the waters of
Here from Hartsville.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, folks. I am glad to have the opportunity to be here. When I talked to George and Carol about it, it was a little bit apprehensive because I don't know much about Francis Marion. I've been coming here for several symposiums, have enjoyed history, and have researched and read more about Francis Marion, but I love churches. I'm a builder by trade, and I always enjoy old churches, old buildings, but particularly churches because I know the sacrifice that people made to build these churches. They typically built well above their means. Their churches, their places of worship were much nicer than even their houses. So what I'd like to do is go through a collection of pictures of churches that I have put together for this, which are typically in this area. A lot of them are Episcopal churches. You'll hear of parishes, churches of ease, and things like that of the early colonial days, 1700s, early 1800s. There's one or two with some religious significance on up into the 1900s, but that's the reason for this group, is because of where they are as it relates to where Francis Marion once rode and operated out of. The format is going to be a little bit different in the fact that I've got plenty of churches. George is going to run me out in a little while, and so we can stop at any point in the church order. There's no order to the churches that we'll be seeing. I say that to say if you have questions, let's ask those on that particular church, because it will not be a question and answer series or question and answer time at the end. We'll just keep seeing different edifices right up to the end. So please, don't hesitate to ask questions. I can tell you a good bit about the construction of them. If you want to know much about the preachers and the religion and how things got started on that, I may have to refer to some of our preachers in the audience, but I can tell you some things about the buildings themselves. So again, please don't hesitate to ask questions as we go through. The first church that we'll look at is St. John's Island Presbyterian Church down in Charleston area. It was built in 1719. It was established in 1710. It's of the classic meeting style type building. In other words, it's a basic rectangle. No big frills, but it's just a basic rectangle in its style. The church has been added on to, it's been enlarged. It was enlarged in 1792 and also in 1823. This church is the oldest wood frame Presbyterian church in the United States. There are older churches, but this is the oldest wood frame Presbyterian church. Again, built in 1719. Keep in mind, South Carolina was pretty much formed or first landed in late 1600s, 1670. So it does go back very early, right on the coast there at Johns Island in Charleston. The interior, very nice pulpit area, but it's not exactly what you would think. It's pine wood painted to look like crotch mahogany. Early days, they could not afford the nice wood, but they wanted nice wood. So they faux painted it to look like crotch mahogany in this case. The exterior is beaded, lap siding. Again, they wanted something nice, wanted something extra. So on each board, they would cut this bead to set their home, their house of worship above others, which did not have that. As a builder, I enjoy even getting under the buildings, looking at them. This particular beam runs around the perimeter, is hand hewn, 12 inches square, it was 30 feet long. All came out of one tree. For those that may not know, hand hewn is basically they would cut the round tree down, lay it on the ground, and chop it square with foot adze, hand adze to get it square, and those were the main support beams. These are pegs that affixed the floor joists that run in this direction to the main seal. We'll talk a lot today about the work that goes on in building these type buildings. Keep in mind, they didn't go anywhere and buy something. Whatever they used, they made themselves. Years of preparation in building any building, but particularly a church building. Christ Episcopal Church in Florence County. Christ Episcopal Church was originally built in 1859, established the same year as a chapel of ease of Trinity Episcopal in the neighboring Society Hill. Of course, Society Hill today is a much smaller community than Florence is. This is still an active congregation there in the Florence area, but it was built as a chapel of ease, and we'll talk more about chapel of ease as we go along. The builder of this church was an Adam B.D., and it's board and batten. These boards are 1x10 boards with 1x4 battens over the joints to eliminate or to prevent the water from coming in. It's built in a Gothic form of style. Gothic in the fact that we have steep roofs, pointed windows. This particular edifice is a carpenter Gothic because it's all wood. Unlike a brick Gothic church, this is carpenter Gothic because of the wood aspect of it. It's also built in the cruciform, which is the form of a Latin cross. The main portion of the building runs the length of it. This transept on this side is identical to the transept on the other side. I feel sure a lot of you have seen cruciform type churches. Some may recognize them as that, others may not. But this is a Carpenter Gothic cruciform style building. Interior is, again, for 1859, is an engineered marvel. The pastor of this church, John D. McCullough, was also a trained architect, and he designed this house of worship. Architects, again, we'll talk about a little bit more later, but they are different than the architects that we know today. Very few of them are trained architects. They're very limited in their plan drawing ability, but they looked at pictures and were able to tell the builders how to do it. He is listed as the architect for Christ Episcopal Church. These are scissor trusses with a vaulted ceiling. Just structurally, if you've got rafters, that puts motion on the outside walls, wanting to push the outside walls out. But these scissor trusses and these bars going across counteract that motion of pushing the walls outward, holding the walls plumb and straight. So there's a reason for having scissor trusses more than just the looks. They're serving a purpose in holding the walls plumb and straight. Our next church is real close to here in Clarendon County, is Brewington Presbyterian Church. It was established in 1811 and built in 1811. It's a very quaint little country church built in the Greek revival style for the fact that columns hold up a porch above it. Very symmetrical in style, and it is it's presently not an active congregation. They have one service a year, which just happened to be last Sunday. They celebrated their 200th anniversary with about 200 people at Brewington this past weekend. It was disbanded in 1951. Other churches absorbed their membership, but they do maintain the church in a very nice, beautiful way. It, again, is very close to here. It's out on Brewington Road, right off of Highway 50, going towards King Street. So a lot of these buildings right near us, if you just know what you're looking for, if you see one, do stop and appreciate it for a few moments, because it really is very nice. It just sits out pretty much by itself there off of Brewington Road. 2 doors. Typically, a lot of churches in that period had 2 doors. The door on the right was for the men, the door on the left is for the women. And that held true for a long, long time. They would go in that way and then eventually get back together to sit as a family unit on the inside. But that's the origin of 2 doors, is for the men and the women. One by 6 lap siding. This is not beaded siding. It's just square-edged siding. I would assume a working potbelly stove. That was obviously their means of heat. Most all the churches in the earlier periods were built with clear glass in the windows. Didn't have the money for stained glass. So most all of the churches were built with clear glass. Possibly over time they have been changed to stained glass as a memorial or whatnot. We mentioned Trinity earlier up in Society Hill, probably an hour and a half or so from here. It was established in 1833. This building was built in 1834 for a cost of $1,150 was the cost of it when it was built in 34. They have one service a year. It's usually in the middle of May. Church in Darlington, St. Matthew's Episcopal Church there in Darlington sponsors it. A side benefit of me being able to find these churches and research them is I've learned when a lot of the services are. I have thoroughly enjoyed going to these services. Now, if you want a real inspiration, you go to a church service in the middle of May, spring, the azaleas are blooming, they open the shutters, raise the windows, and it's a special experience to be able to worship in a church of that category. And it's very meaningful. And a lot of the churches, the old churches, do have services in pleasant times of the year, whether it be early spring or in the fall. And so if you hear of churches that are having an annual service, by all means do avail yourself of the opportunity to go. But again, this is Trinity. They're in downtown Society Hill. If you've never been to Society Hill, it's on Highway 52 in Darlington County. Again, take the opportunity to go to Society Hill. It's a real treat for you. None of these churches that I've been to are on the interstate. Folks, you got to get off and get on the roads. Some of them on dirt roads, all over on 1-lane roads or 2-lane roads. But it's well worth your time to do that. The organ is a very interesting organ. It is a Simmons organ, WBD Simmons. It was installed in 1873 for $100 more than the church cost. So it was a very expensive organ in its time, $1,250. Obviously, it's a pump organ, and during a service, a little individual stands right here and pumps the organ to fill the bellows. They've had it restored. They use the organ on a regular basis and get some good sounds. That combined with the breeze blowing in, again, it's a good experience that adds to the worship service. They have done some restoration to the building as far as maintaining the building, but it is truly an old edifice. You can see that it's been there since 1834. It's not all brand new, and so a lot of the items that you see are worn. It's always real interesting to watch people deal with the doors as they go in. They can't seem to keep the hands off the doors. They always want to open and close them. Even all during the service, they'll open and close. It's a novelty for them. We mentioned about preparing the timbers, not buying anything. Up under this church, and we'll see it in other buildings too, they would begin getting material ready 2 and sometimes 3 years ahead of time. They knew what timbers would go in certain locations. So as they would hew the timbers, as they would size them and get them the right size, they'd put marks on them. I don't know what the marking system was, but this was 7/1. They were getting all these timbers ready with foot adze and hand adze and chisels. So they would just stamp in Roman numerals in the timbers when they were preparing the timbers. Then when they were actually building, a carpenter would call for 7/1, and another group would bring it forward. That timber could have been prepared, again, 2 years earlier, but that was their marking system. If you know what you're looking for, they're fairly readily seen that this is up under the building. This rod is an earthquake rod. There's always some question about whether they were installed during the construction or they were installed afterwards. I think they were installed afterwards. We saw a lot of them. No, I didn't see them, I wasn't here. But we hear a lot of evidence of them being installed after the earthquake of 1886 in Charleston, which had far-reaching damage way on up into upper South Carolina and even North Carolina and Virginia. Devastating earthquake to Charleston. We see a lot of earthquake rods being added after that point. What the earthquake rods do, in this case, this is under the building. As that building shook, it tended to spread out. This steel rod, big nuts on the end of it, drew the building back together, or it held it where it did spread, just to prevent it from spreading anymore. But again, knowing what you're looking for, they're fairly obvious and can be seen in a lot of structures in this time period. Williamsburg Presbyterian. Williamsburg Presbyterian obviously is a fairly new building. It was only built in 1913, so it's not even 100 years old. But it has very deep-reaching implications towards religion, particularly the Presbyterian religion. It has about 30 children and grandchildren that it has been offsprings for. Several of them we'll see today, time permitting. But it was established in 1736. It's had numerous worship centers. This one was the last one, the one they're using now, was built in 1913. It's in Williamsburg County, downtown King Street. John Witherspoon formed the Williamsburg Meeting House, as it was called, in 1736 and built the first building. This is Greek Revival in style. Doric columns holding up a portico for a porch. Doric columns, D-O-R-I-C. Doric columns are larger at the bottom than they are at the top. They taper. You can have fluted Doric. These are smooth Doric. But it is Greek Revival in style. Henry Walker and Henry Burden built this building again in 1913. When it was built in 13, it cost $15,000, which was a lot of money for the Presbyterians in 1913. Again, they made sacrifices. They wanted their house of worship to be a special place, and indeed it is. But it is included because of the deep-reaching effects it's had on this area, particularly through the Presbyterian faith. St. Helena's Chapel of Ease. People ask here, what is your favorite church? Which one do you like the most? Oddly enough, I appreciate the ruins more than some of the complete buildings standing, because they have withstood the test of time. Even after they've lost all their waterproofing abilities, they're still standing. This Chapel of Ease was built in 1740 as a Chapel of Ease of the main parish church in Beaufort, St. Helena, there in Beaufort. Its size is 30 feet wide and 40 feet long in its size, and is built with tabby construction. Tabby construction is typically and basically only found down around the coast because of the availability of oyster shells. Tabby construction is a process of gathering oysters, cooking the oyster shells, which kills the salt. Then they pulverize and crush the oyster shells, which makes a lime product. Lime is the product that's also used in making of cement. They'll mix all that with sand and water and pour it in between forms, wooden forms. In this case, the walls are 16 inches thick. So they make this tabby paste. Basically, they're making their form of cement, of concrete, using oyster shells and the lime that produces. But it has to be cooked. Others have tried to do it without using that process, and the salt content, which has not been neutralized, it comes from the ocean, just deteriorates their tabby construction. And if you've built a tabby building, then it deteriorates your building, and down it comes very quickly. But it's a process that they and only they can do because they have the ability, they have the access to the oysters. Again, if you can just imagine anything that was wooden, in this case, it survived the Revolutionary War, it survived the Civil War, and it was actually just burned by a forest fire in 1886, right after the Civil War. But due to the Civil War, they just didn't have the money to rebuild this church, so it stands, and they're in ruins on Land's End Road outside of Beaufort.
Bill, were there any indications of reinforcing inside of that?
We see some evidence of holes, here, back up to here. These are joist pockets. Yes, the walls were supported by ceiling joists that went from the top of these walls into these pockets and back over to this wall. But as far as any reinforcement in the interior wall, there is none. It's just pure concrete. Again, they're 16 inches thick, and they're built in between forms. Here we see the brick. They put the brick there to form the arch. Brick, as they're laid in that form, are self-supporting. You could take the forms away, and the brick would continue to stand there on their own because they're pressing. One brick is pressing against the next brick all the way around. It cannot fall because of just the geometry of the arch. But no, there's very little, if any, bonding reinforcement as we know of as rebar and steel. And when you look very closely at it, and if you've never seen a tabby construction building, look at it. You can actually see the oyster shells because they left some oyster shells in large aggregate. Typically today we mix lime or cement powder, sand and water and rock to give it strength. But they just use the oyster shell as their large aggregate. This was, the altar area was in this area, and this was a large window. This is actually the front of the church. You would enter from opposite that end. There's the front door. There's also had a porch across the front, and it was supported by these solid brick columns, which were stuccoed around. The next one is probably, I think, the prettiest place in South Carolina, Sheldon, Prince William Parish. Anybody been to Sheldon? Good, good. Those that didn't raise their hand, get in your car tomorrow and leave and go see it.
No, sir.
It is well worth the trip to go see Sheldon. Sheldon was built in 1755. British troops burned it in 1779. It was rebuilt in 1824. Sherman and his group came through and they burned it September the 14th, 1865. Church said twice, that's it. We're not going to build it back again. Again, keep in mind, everything that was wood burned, the brick, the walls 24 and 36 inches thick, those walls were maintained so they could build right back on top of the brick that were left. It's built in the Greek temple form. It's 47 feet wide and 67 feet long. A massive church for such a remote area of Garden Corner in Beaufort County. Absolutely beautiful. Live oak trees all around it. It's just the brickwork there, the solitude there is most rewarding and should be appreciated by many. The first time I was there, this girl and her family was there. She's getting married at Sheldon a year from that day. She came a year in advance to plan her wedding as it relates to the sun. She wanted to see what it would look like for a 4 o'clock wedding, a 5 o'clock wedding, a 6 o'clock wedding. So her wedding, as all brides want to be, is perfect. But she was there a year in advance so she could plan it. But again, all of these, where the windows were, all of that wood had burned out. What's the sound? Yeah, go ahead and play and I'll talk to the side. But you get some idea of the scale of the building here. Notice the people standing there. Now, these full-grown people. Those columns are 36 inches in diameter and 32 feet tall. Solid brick. There's no hollow over in it. They're all solid. And all the brick are handmade. Typically, the brick were made fairly close to the location of the building. So just a massive amount of time went into building, preparing the material and building this building. Again, it's just fully covered with live oak trees all around it and green grass. It's maintained on a regular basis. They have one service a year. The Sunday after Easter is their annual service for Prince William at Sheldon. The interior of the walls have been plastered over. Over time, some of that plaster has come off, but plaster was adhered directly to the brick because these are solid brick walls. The brick is natural brick on the outside, of course, and then the plaster has been covered. The brick are covered over on the inside to give it a finished look on the inside of the church. Central Methodist Church down in Marion, Britain's Neck. Interesting behind this Methodist church, it was built as All Saints Episcopal Church when it was built in Craven County in 1735. The people that came to Craven County brought two things with them when they came other than their personal belongings. They brought a preacher and they brought brick to build a church. Religion was very important to our early settlers, and so they wanted to make sure that they had the material. They kind of counted on being able to get the wood when they got here, but they didn't think they could get the brick, so they brought the brick and their own preacher when they came in 1735. All Saints was in a remote area. It wasn't supported by the Episcopal, well, it wasn't Episcopal then, it was Anglican church then. It wasn't supported by the Anglican church, so it fell into the hands of the Methodist. And so it's now Central United Methodist. When it was originally built in 35, it stayed at that location for a good many years, and then it was moved in 1858. Trying to get rid of that humming.
Yeah, it said, hold the seat horizontal.
Yeah, just put it back in there, and we'll see if it. We'll just keep it horizontal. I'll just stand away from it a little bit, and we'll try to. I don't know if the humming is bothering y'all. Obviously, I'm noticing it. Hopefully, it doesn't bother you too much. Do I need to get closer to it? Okay. You know, we talked about things being pegged together and how they were built. This church building has been moved twice. It's been dismantled and moved twice. You peg things together, you just drive the pegs back out. Take it apart, move it down the road. In this case, it was moved 14 miles down the road in 1858. Then it was moved to its present location in 1917. The Old Neck Cemetery was a name that the church had for a while, and then now when it's moved back to here, it combined Nebo and Old Neck, and now it's Central United Methodist Church. It is an active, functioning church on a regular basis. The columns, of course, again, the Greek revival, columns across the front are solid trees. Cut the trees down, round them up a little bit more, stand them up as columns, which really makes more sense than the columns we use today, which are hollow on the inside. But these are solid. They could deal with these much easier at that time than trying to build a column. You would have box columns, square columns, or solid tree columns. And here you can see more of the columns as well. As I remember, those columns are 14 inches in diameter, and naturally they are Doric columns because trees do get narrower at top, and so they are natural Doric columns. St. James Goose Creek, down in Berkeley County. Beautiful church there in Berkeley County. This is the second oldest church in South Carolina. It was built in 1719. St. James Goose Creek is one of the 10 original parishes set out by the Anglican Church in South Carolina. And so they built this church, finished it in July of 1719, and it is one of 3 original churches that are still in existence, original parish churches which are still in existence in South Carolina. Its size is, yes, sir.
Are they built on a slab?
Sir?
Are these churches built on a slab?
Yes, they are. Yeah, they're pretty much all of them. Well, certainly this one is flat on the ground. It's a concrete type slab, and we'll see on the inside what the floor is actually made of. But it's 40 feet wide and 50 feet long. It does have a stucco appearance now. It was stuccoed in, it was originally built as a brick, but this pink stucco was added in 1810. Started having trouble with the brick deteriorating, so they put a stucco coat on the outside to maintain the integrity of the brick. These are coin corners that are built into the brick to strengthen the corners. They aren't there just for looks. There's a real purpose for them being there, and they're called coin corners.
What's the construction of it?
Sir?
What's the construction of the corner?
It's all brick. It's just thicker brick. In other words, if your wall is I think in this one the walls are typically 24 inches thick. These are more like 28 inches thick. You've added more brick on the corners to strengthen the corners. You'll see it also in pilasters, very long buildings. You'll see pilasters which the wall is thicker to give the wall more strength in loading places. Beautiful setting there. There's a graveyard all around. Does anyone know the difference between a graveyard and a cemetery? Graveyard is associated with the church. Cemeteries are public places. Is that the way you're? Yeah, I think a graveyard is associated with a church. You ride up and down the road, you see Magnolia or Westview Cemetery. Cemetery is not associated with a church or on church grounds, but graveyards are on church grounds, hallowed grounds. A lot of the early settlers came here from Barbados to South Carolina. They didn't come directly from England, they came from Barbados. So along with them, they brought a style called Baroque style of construction. What's very unique to that style is this jerkin head roof. Jerkin head roof, they learned in the islands that if they clip the corner of the roof back off and lay it down, it was more friendly towards hurricanes. The wind would not catch the point of the roof and rip the roof off. So this jerkin head style roof is the point of the roof has been clipped back on both ends to be more tolerant of the wind. This symbol over the front door is a pelican feeding her young. It is, and I'll read it, the sign of the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts. In the Anglican religion, you could only be a priest for the church if you were ordained by the bishop in England. So in other words, the parishes could not come up with their own preacher. He had to come from England. He was trained in England. He was ordained by the bishop in England. And so this group treated America, ultimately America, as a mission field. So they would send priests over to preside over the parishes, the first 10 parishes, and then that expanded to 21 parishes in South Carolina. Along came the Revolutionary War, and we kind of wanted to wash our hands of England, and so we disassociated ourselves with the Anglican religion, and the same group of people adopted the Episcopal religion, which were basically the same. It's just they were not associated with, nor did answer to the Church of England back home. Beautiful interior. They have one service a year, and I think it's the Sunday, 2 Sundays after Easter. I would tell you to go, but it's a little bit difficult to get in. I had to call ahead and had to make sure that I was honorable before I could get in. It's a very strong Episcopal church. They fill it up with their own each service, and so I've been to several Episcopal churches, but that one was a little bit different. I didn't quite know where to sit. But again, the interior is very ornate there. This is a sounding board, which is directly over the pulpit to project the sound out for the preacher. It's rumored that the church was not burned by the British because of King George I's coat of arms over the pulpit. The Apostles' Creed here and the Lord's Prayer over on that side. Box pews. Those are owned by families. Today we talk about you can't